The Gemara that we're on is page 16a, Tes Zayin Amud Aleph, and the discussion that we were having the last 2 days was had to do with something that was a vessel, but it lost its designation as a vessel. Does it still remain in its original status? Or its prior status, I should say. Does it still remain with its prior status of being invalid for schach? And the two cases that we were dealing with, one was this aruches hamita, some type of piece of frame of the bed, and the other cases were baloe kalim, which are worn out clothing, pieces of clothing. And the Gemara differentiated and said, well, the bed, it could be that it's still considered a vessel. So you can't really prove anything, compare that case to the case of the worn out clothing that's no longer usable, not for wealthy people and not for poor people. When you have such a small piece of material, it's really unusable. It's no longer a utensil, a vessel. It's not considered a kli. It should not be makabel tuma. However, since it was invalid for schach, it remains invalid for schach. And we saw two reasons behind that from the Rishonim. One had to do with the fact that once it's considered pushed aside, we keep it that way. And the other understanding was it's almost like a gzeira, or it is a gzeira. It's like a decree that we're afraid if you use this small type of a garment, this small piece of a garment for schach, you'll end up using something slightly bigger for schach, and it will actually be invalid because that slightly bigger piece will be considered a kli, a makabel tumas, is susceptible to impurity, because something bigger is usable as like a patch or for other purposes, maybe a handkerchief, I don't know. So that was the discussion in the Gemara about these items that were susceptible to tuma and no longer are susceptible to tuma, to impurity. And the Gemara then brought a brisa yesterday on page 16a. The Gemara brought a brisa was a Tanya Kavosei, the Reb Ami Bar Tavyume. It was a brisa that was a support for Reb Ami Bar Tavyume, and it had to do with a mat, with different types of mats made from papyrus or from reeds. And ultimately, the brisa had said that even the remainings of it, if it wore out and it became small, that it's no longer usable for its purpose, and seems like the purpose was to sit on or to lie down upon. And if the measurement became less than the shear, than the official law, the rule for these type of items, and these type of items, the rule is 6 tefachim, 6 handbreadths by 6 handbreadths, which is basically an amma. And so if it gets less than that, it would not be really susceptible to impurity because it's no longer a vessel. Nevertheless, ein mesakhin bahem, we still do not use them for schach. And Rashi says because they come from a kli, they came from a vessel, and it was makabel tuma when it was a vessel, when it was usable, because it's called the tuma of mishkov, which is a type of impurity that has to do with material that's normally lied upon, that's made to lie upon, to lie down upon. And or mishkov or maishav, those are the two terms normally used. Rashi uses the term mishkov, but it's also maishav, sitting on, and so on. These would be special type of tuma that could be this would be susceptible to. So anyway, the Gemara brings this brisa that says ein masakhin behem. You cannot use it for schach. But then the brisa told us a case, brought a case of machzelas hakonim. These the machatzelas, the big mats or small mats made out of reeds, and it mentioned that there's a difference. The big ones are actually used; they're used for shade. The small ones are used for lying down on, and basically it makes a major difference in halacha, because the big ones you would be allowed to use for schach. You're allowed to use them for schach because they aren't really susceptible to impurity. But the small ones, they are meant to lie upon, and therefore they are not usable for schach. And that was the first opinion in the brisa. And the second opinion was Rabbi Eliezer. And he says that even big ones you should not use for schach because they're all used to be laid down upon. Now, laid upon. Now, the understanding here is that because we don't really know what you had in mind, we're relying on what's called stam, the assumption. We're relying on what we're assuming. And so this is what the argument is. When are you allowed to assume that it was built for schach? And when are you allowed to assume that it was built for lying upon? Now, the halacha, however, would be that if we know what it was meant for, then there would not be an argument here. If we know that you made this mat in order to use for shade, then it would be fine, even if it was small. And if we know that you are interested in using this as your mattress to lay on, that even if it's big, it would be invalid for schach. So the Gemara is the case of this brisa is really a case where we don't know what you had in mind, and we're allowed to assume because this is what they always are used for. We assume that this is what they were made for. Rabbi Eliezer argues, and he says that that the assumption is that they're always used for shriva, for resting on, lying on. Okay, so then the next that was the previous Gemara. The new Gemara we talked about chaytet begodish, and that was the second part of the Mishnah. And this is the source of the law of Tasev V'Leimin Ha'aseh. In other words, this is where the Mishnah expresses this law of that you are not allowed to have a sukkah that the schach became a shade. In other words, it was not put up as shade, but it became shade because you dug under it. You have to make it as a shade. It has to be made that way, and not that you retrofitted it or somehow koshered it into now it's shade. So this was the Mishnah's law, chaytet begodish. Now, what we're going to see is that there is a qualification to this law. In other words, we saw a picture yesterday. I think David showed us a picture of how you sometimes see these big haystacks rolled up, and it seemed like very simple. Just pull right over and dig out a little, and we could sit there and have our sandwich for lunch in our sukkah, and we should be able to use it as a sukkah. And our Mishnah tells us that doesn't work. You would need to build the schach. You would need to put on the schach, make a hole, and then put schach on top. That's what you would need to do. or remove the upper layer, then put it back on it. And almost similar to the Mishnahs that we had before with regard to what you need to do to kosher your tikra she'ein aleh maziva, to use your roof for schach, those type of situations where your schach was invalid, and what do you need to do to kosher it, to make it kosher now? So we would have to do a similar type of thing to make it kosher.
Rabbi,
yeah,
it says here with this haystack that the space, they're creating this space within the sheaves, allowing people to sit inside and use it as sukkah. It's not necessarily naturally fell into that shape. They made an effort to do something to hollow out this space in order to sit inside.
well, for sure. I don't know how that's possible not to have it that way. How would you have a space in it that you didn't hollow out? For sure, you hollowed out a space. Is that what you mean?
So the fact that they're
even if it was round, or if it's made bundles, and the bundles are there, however you did it, what you're doing now is you're going there and hollowing out a space. The problem is that the roof material, the schach, was not placed on top of this empty hollow space. Instead, it was there from before.
Okay, so in other words, you're saying if you came upon a natural occurrence in a forest that was a kosher, or it fit the qualifications of a kosher sukkah, but you didn't do anything to make it like that, it's no good.
So that's correct, and the problem there is seemingly an issue of that it's not necessarily made for schach. It fell that way, and you need to make it for schach. Here, what you did was you dug it out. So you may be able to say that, well, it's made for schach. I made this, for schach, but I didn't place the schach there for schach. So the schach has to be placed originally. When it's placed, the schach has to be placed. So it can't be retroactively, you placed there for schach. So even though you dug out and you made this into a sukkah, but nevertheless, the schach is being fixed to schach. It's being fixed into schach. It wasn't placed for schach. The other scenario, you might have an issue originally we don't know how it fell. It fell there, like it wasn't with kavana for schach, for shade. So in that scenario, it really takes it one step backwards. In that scenario, it's not done lishma. You didn't do it for the shem schach. It doesn't have to be for a mitzvah. It has to be put there for schach. So if it's not put there for schach, that would seemingly be a problem.
So if I took a palm branch and just threw it on top, would that be okay?
So it could be okay. Depends on the problem is in this. You're talking about a case of what? Of the sukkah that you found built in the forest? Are you talking about the case of the haystack?
The haystack.
Yeah. So in the haystack, the only thing is that once you start dealing with the kosher schach and non-kosher schach, you're getting yourself into questionable area. But the easiest thing would be to take it off and throw on top of it branches. Take off the top, or put the stuff back on after you take it off. So now you're making a sukkah that's for shade. You know what I'm saying? You want to just throw on a branch. We'd have to see how that works. In other words,
if you start taking off the top, the whole thing's liable to fall apart.
So I understand what you're saying. You might want to use another
So,
a
Rebbe,
different sukkah.
I would
Yeah.
think the question is whether you're putting enough kosher schach on top to make it enough, and whether there's not enough of the not kosher schach to interfere. So you would have to have less than a certain amount of the not kosher schach, and then you would have to have a certain amount on top to make it kosher, to eliminate the non-kosher schach.
Right, but if you think that's as easy as
No,
you
no, I
just said
didn't say
it,
it was easy. I'm saying these are your
right,
two goals.
right.
You have to
That's
make
a
sure
very
the old
well,
stuff doesn't interfere with your schach, and you
right.
have to make sure the new schach is enough to cover your sukkah.
Just a second. Thank you for clarifying it, Isaac, because you did put it in very easy words. But as you yourself agree, it's not as simple as it
No,
sounds.
no, 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 no.
But yeah, you did word that very, very well. So so that's the story, David. It's not as simple as it sounds. So again, also if we worked in haystacks, maybe we would understand what you could, maybe we would have more practical understanding of this. How much can it handle, how much can't it handle, how much weight, how much weight it can handle, and so on, and what would work, what type of branches can go on it. But being that we're in North Miami Beach here, it's not exactly a place where we get that experience. Okay, so anyway, the Gemara brought the Mishnah and is elaborating on it about this chotet begodish, where you're digging out the measurement of a sukkah, and the problem is that the schach is considered to have been fixed into schach, and not that it was placed there originally uh, onto a sukkah, onto an area. But the Gemara now has something that it tells us something that we really did touch upon a while back. And that had to do with when you have a sukkah on top of a sukkah. We talked about it there that both sukkahs need to be 10 hand breadths tall. Let me just pull up the earlier Mishnah where it talked about the sukkah al gabe sukkah. The Mishnah that mentions it was on page Tes Amud Base 9b, and the Gemara had said on page 10a, Kama yehe bein sukkah la sukkah usehei hatachtoina pesula. How much needs to be between each sukkah that the bottom one will be considered a sukkah pesula. It'll be an invalid sukkah for being under another sukkah. And Rav Huna over there said a tefach, that the measurement would be a tefach. And we did have other opinions. Rav Chizda and Rabbah by Rav Huna said 4 tefachim, and Shmuel said it has to be a regular sukkah. It's 10 tefachim. Kehachshera kach psula, he said. So we had different opinions over there as to rendering, even though for a kosher sukkah, you need to have 10 hand breadths tall, but it could be that for it could be that if you're not to sit in, but to be considered schach, you don't necessarily need it to be 10 hand breadths. And those not necessarily doesn't have to be a kosher sukkah that you could eat it. It could be considered schach, even if there is just one hand breadth. So here the Gemara talks about this law again. So again, we had it on page 10a, and now we're having it again here on page 16a, where we bring Rav Huna's opinion. And what the Gemara here says, I'm going to just start from the 2 dots, which must be about maybe 15 lines from the top. 16a. If about 17 lines from the top. Amar Rav, so it says Achoitet Gadish, brings the Mishnah. Then it says Amar Rav Huna Loishanu Ela She'ein Sham Chalal Tefach B'Meshach Shiva. That this whole problem of digging in this haystack is because you did not have any hollow there when the haystack was made. But if you had a hollow that was 7 handbreadths by 7 handbreadths width and length, and it was at least 1 tefach tall, and this is what I was referring to from the previous Gemara on page 10, that as long as it's 1 tefach, 1 handbreadth tall, again, a sukkah can't be one tefach. A sukkah would need to be 10 tefachim, but for this purpose, 1 handbreadth would be good enough. It would suffice to have it 1 tefach tall to be considered that this is actual schach that's placed as schach. This is placed there as schach. It's not schach, it's not a material that becomes a shade. This is placed there. This is considered a shade. It's shading over 1 tefach. Now, it's not kosher for a sukkah, but it's still called schach. So once you can call it schach, it no longer would fall into the category of tasev v'lo min ha'asur. So let me read it inside. This whole this statement in the Mishnah was not learned, it was not taught, only in a case where you have 0 hollow. You don't have a hollow of at least 1 handbreadth, b'meshach sheva, with the width and length of 7. But if you do have a height of a handbreadth, b'meshach shiva, in the size of with 7 handbreadths in the 7 handbreadth area, so you have 1 handbreadth tall in a 7 handbreadth area, harezu sukkah, that would be a sukkah, would be a kosher sukkah. Afterwards, when you dug it out up to 10 handbreadths, you would now have made this into a kosher sukkah. So I'm not sure exactly how you got it to stand there with that empty hollow space, but somehow I guess some of the bundles of the hay was I guess was situated in a different position, or was situated in a way where it actually was able to suspend itself above a handbreadth of area, or somehow it was suspended there in that way, and by doing it, or maybe there was some rocks or something that suspended it. Somehow it was suspended, and then all you're doing now is digging out from below, digging out more space so that you could have your 10 handbreadth height to make it a kosher sukkah. But we can't say that this is a problem of tasev v'lo min ha'asur, that it was not built in a kosher way, because as long as it can be called schach, then it was built right. As long as you could say you made schach, you put it there as schach, that is kosher. It doesn't have to be a kosher sukkah. It has to be schach. Then you put it there as schach. And if you placed it there as schach, then it would be considered kosher. And at least the way Rashi is learning over here, so you're digging out from below to above and making the right size of a sukkah to make it kosher.
Rabbi,
Yes.
it seems from the picture that David sent us yesterday that the hay itself, it kind of like it's like interwoven into this bale of hay. I guess so that it sticks to itself basically, so that all you have to do is make the space.
Yeah.
This is what it looked like in the picture.
Yeah, correct. What I was talking about now was, how do you have that with an empty space of a tefach below while it's being made? In other words, to have it flush on the ground, no problem. It somehow interconnects the pieces. But to have an empty space and have it still stand with that empty space, and it doesn't fall down into it.
Maybe some of the bundles were
Different
taller
size
than other bundles.
Yeah.
And so when you had it all on top, and then all you had to do was you had this space because some of the bundles weren't the same height, and you just pulled out the ones that
Yeah,
were
I'm not disagreeing. There's a way. There's ways of how to do it. I'm just saying, you'll have to figure out how they did it, but it's not impossible. Yeah, no, it's not
right,
impossible. I'm sure,
right.
so it's almost like how they make in Israel. They have all these stone ceilings where the stones can't fall down because they're stuck in a like a dome shape almost. So there's no it can't fall out because each one is locks in the other one. Whatever, I'm just saying there's ways of doing it that I'm sure they'll figure it out. People in the farmers know what they're doing. Okay, so the Gemara then says that Tanya Nami Hachi, we have a brisa that also states this fact that Rav Huna said. Hachoite begadish lasis loy sukkah, harezu sukkah, hareza sukkah. A person um I'm sorry. Let me say that one more time. Tanya Nami Hachoite begadish lasis sukkah, harezu sukkah. That we have a brisa like this, that a person who digs into the gadish to make a sukkah v'anan tanan eina sukkah. But didn't we learn that it's not a sukkah? Our Mishnah says it's not a sukkah, so how could the brisa say it is a sukkah? Elalav shmamina k'derav Huna shmamina. So we hear from this, like Rav Huna must have said, the way he qualified it, shmamina, that's what we hear from this. So basically, the way this Gemara flowed was that the Mishnah said a law, Rav Huna qualified it, and then we brought a brisa that seemed to say the opposite of our Mishnah, but based on Rav Huna's qualification, it answers it that it's not a contradiction. And then the Gemara has another way of wording this. Some ask this in a different, they put it in a different order. They make it number one, there's a contradiction. Our Mishnah to this brisa. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah. If you dug out from the godish, which is this pile of hay or bundles of hay, a pile of bundles. Either way, you dug out of it. Lasis loy sukkah, to make for yourself a sukkah. You dug out an area. Ain't a sukkah. It is not a kosher sukkah. It's not acceptable. The Gemara says v'hatanya harezu sukkah, but we have a contradiction because there's a brisa that says it is a sukkah. It's kosher. And the answer is Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna comes and he answers it like kasha, not a question, not a contradiction. Kan b'sheyesh sham chalal tefach b'meshach shiva, kan b'sheyesh sham chalal tefach b'meshach shiva. That the difference is, the answer is that there's a chalal tefach b'meshach shiva, that you have an empty space of a tefach that's 7 handbreadths width and length, and that will permit it that even though it's not a full size of a sukkah, but it's enough to call it schach. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, well, the halacha stuff too was to like whether like an area is a tummy or not. Well, whether there's a space of 1 handbreadth that can come into play.
Right. And now, if you remember on Daf Yud, so they each brought their sources for why they hold about the sukkah under a sukkah, and the source of Rav Huna was tefach al tefach rum tefach. We find with an oihel for tuma. So just as you're saying it, I don't know if you remembering it from then, or you're just putting the 2 dots together. But either way, good call, because that is the way Rav Huna explains his source. That we see from there that an oihel could be even if it's 1 tefach tall. So that was his source. Taisus over here says something interesting. He says that even the other opinions that give their laws regarding a sukkah under a sukkah, it could be that here they will agree. And that's what Taisus over here wants to say, that it's not necessarily that they would hold, just because they held over there in order to invalidate your sukkah, you need the top sukkah to be a real sukkah, doesn't necessarily, or they need it to be more of a substantial sukkah, like there was one opinion there about 10 tfachim, and in that opinion, Taisva seems to be pretty confident that even though a sukkah under a sukkah, it had to be a real sukkah, but here, to be called not tasev leimena, also you just need one tefach, one handbreadth. You don't need 10 handbreadths. So Taisva says if Shmuel holds that, so it could be the other opinion about the size of 4 handbreadths. Maybe he also would agree that the size of this choited begadish could be permissible as long as it's even just 1 handbreadth. You wouldn't need 4, even though over there he said they said that the generally we hold a space is 4 handbreadths, but it could be here we're just trying to get around the problem of the fact that it's not called you made the schach. Maybe that would be enough to say this. You made the schach. It's not min ha'asui. It's tasa. You made it as schach. It's not a location. It's not enough to be considered a sizable place, but it is called schach. So maybe even he would agree 1 tefach is enough for that purpose. So again, it is interesting, and the reason I'm mentioning it is because I would think that what's bothering Taisvis and something that was bothering me is why I'm guessing this is what was bothering Taisvis is why doesn't our Gemara bring down those other opinions? As our Gemara just quotes this view here, and it doesn't quote the other views from the laws of Sukkah Gabe Sukkah. In fact, let's just, I don't have a Shulchan Aruch here, but Tafresh Chaf Ches Aleph, let me just pull up here on Sefaria. Yeah, let's see, Sefaria. 626, the 20, Tafresh Chaf Ches, 628 in Shulchan Aruch, Shulchan Aruch, Chaim 628. There has to be 10 tfachim between them. So he paskins like Shmuel over there. The law follows Shmuel over there. Now, who does the halacha follow over here? Rav Huna, and here the halacha follows in Tafresh Lamed Hey in 635. The halacha follows seems to follow Rav Huna. So what comes out is that obviously Shmuel and Rav Huna must agree. In other words, it's not otherwise it would be a contradiction. Why here they're paskening 1 if both opinions should go hand in hand, then it would be surprising to paskin differently. Halal tefach, they bring this that all you need is a hollow. Do you follow what I'm saying? That our Gemara brings only the opinion of Rav Huna about the size is 1 handbreadth. The Gemara on page 10 brought 3 opinions, and seemingly it could be the same debate there could be mentioned here. Our Gemara doesn't bring the same debate, doesn't bring that debate here. So that's why Tosfos seems to be convinced that maybe everyone agrees with this opinion of Rav Huna here. And then I'm taking it a step further because we see Shulchan Aruch actually paskins that way. In Shulchan Aruch, they actually paskin over there, according to one view, the 10 tefachim rule regarding a sukkah under another sukkah. And here they follow the 1 tefach rule. the one-hand breath rule. So it must be that the way the Shulchan Aruch follows is the way, understanding it as Taisvis, that even the opinion that says 10 over there can agree that over here, one-hand breath would be good enough. So that's the that would seemingly answer this question of why our Gemara is not bringing those different opinions there. And the answer is because those opinions there don't argue here. They actually agree with Rav Huna. There, it was a different law. Of course, it deserves to be looked into a little more, but there is a different law. It's a sukkah under a sukkah. Does the upper sukkah need to be a kosher sukkah to invalidate the bottom sukkah? And here we're talking about schach to be called schach. So it could be that there's a difference between something called a sukkah or something called schach. Schach needs a one hand below it. A sukkah needs to be a kosher sukkah. So maybe along those lines. Yes, Jeffrey.
We don't really have any walls over here that you built, and the roll that we saw in that picture had a space in the middle. So already was existing space, and it's as long as the roll is. So that you could imagine somebody was crawling in there. Okay, but it still doesn't look to me like it's too feasible to have it large enough to have your majority of your body and your table. So it seems to me that in any case, it's an exception to the normal understanding about.
Okay. So, right. Well, yeah. I mean, nowhere does it say that that's that you could fit your body and your table in this one tefach tall thing, right?
No, right. But presumably you're hollowing it out more than what it's already there. But the picture we saw, it already had a hollow.
Okay.
In the roll of the.
Yeah, obviously you're going to need to roll to dig it out to make it kosher. No question about that.
Right.
But the question was, is it even kosher? Will it even be kosher then after you dig it out more?
It certainly doesn't look like that to me. It seems to be a very exceptional kind of idea. Okay, so I'm wondering. I mean, sometimes they want to purposely consider very, very extreme positions just to know the limits of what you're discussing. But it seems in every other way, it's not a dira. It's not even a dira that's temporary. You can't really bring anything else into it. You don't have any walls, so it's a very, very extreme. And they rejected the other kind of extreme where you had a straw mat or something like that leaning on a wall, and where you could also crawl in. You could put these things, lean it on the wall, and they said it's not good because it's so small. It's not really a space, and doesn't have walls, and maybe it doesn't have a roof because it's at an angle.
Okay, so, we're going to get to that. Let's leave that.
Okay.
Okay,
very good.
Very interesting point. I think your main point, Jeffrey, was the fact that this is like a dira srucha, and that it seemingly should not be kosher even after you dig it out, which is an interesting question. And I don't know what it smells like in this hay, so I'm not sure how bad. I guess we think of these places, when we go on these farms and everything smells from the animals and so on, and not necessarily is hay going to smell that way. I don't know, so it could be that it's not as bad as it sounds. So for whatever reason, the Gemara understands that it's not as smelly as you're thinking, and it would be a kosher sukkah.
It's more like an enclosure.
It would be an enclosure, right? This enclosure. Now, what was I saying? The Shulchan Aruch here, just pull it up again. It says an interesting halacha here. That what happens if you want to widen it? You made the halal tefach, you made the hand breadth, but then you want to widen it to make it more than 7. So it's not going to kasher the whole sukkah. He created a space of 1 handbreadth high and 7 handbreadths, and afterwards hollows it out till it reaches 10 hand. 1 second. So it makes a big space and doesn't stop until the hole is 1 handbreadth high and 7 handbreadths. And then he digs out a lot, makes a big sukkah there. It is not valid at all. This is because he withdraws 7 and doesn't stop from the beginning. I don't know why they translate it that way. This is because he withdraws 7 and doesn't stop from the beginning. If he digs from the 2 sides to increase the 7, even the 7 is invalid. Anyway, bottom line is that you need to make sure that you dig it out as wide as you want in the first place, that you leave that space in the first place as wide as you want, because otherwise afterwards you're going to have a problem that not all of the schach is real schach, because it wasn't originally a tefach under it. It was only, you only had the 7 tefachim in the first place. Anyway, okay, so that's the Shulchan Aruch. Let me just see the Mishnah Berurah here. Mishnah Berurah. Okay, yeah, very good. Okay, so we're up to the next Mishnah, and page 16a. We're going to start the next Mishnah now. We are about 12 lines up from the bottom of the page. Mashal shel defanois. If a person lowers his walls, milmaila lamata, from above to below, which basically means that he is making walls that are like weaving them, and from the schach downward. But the problem was that he didn't reach the floor. So it says that Hamashal shel defanos b'mayla lamata, he weaves and works on weaving them from above, from the height of the sukkah, the schach, to the lower area. So im gavaya min haaretz shloisha tefachim, if it's above the earth 3 handbreadths, which means that there's an empty space of 3 handbreadths on the floor, stula, it is invalid. So even though the wall has 10 handbreadths, nevertheless, there's an empty space that is considered enough for a goat, which we saw a few pages back, that a goat could go through that area. that makes it invalid to be a wall. It's no longer called a wall, and because goats could pass through it, and so therefore we can't allow you to consider your wall that is 10 handbreadths, but it's suspended. It's suspended, and it allows you to have empty space too much, more than loved. Loved means everything is all connected. It's attached. We look at it as if it's one. And here it's more than that because it's enough. It's more. It's 3 tfachim, and which is enough for a goat to go through. So that would be invalid. The Mishnah says psula. It is invalid.
That's only 3 tvachim underneath, not above. It's only that the wall never started because it was more than 3 tvachim off the ground.
Correct. Underneath. The next paragraph tells us if it's the opposite way. The interesting question really is, what would happen if you do something to block the goats from coming? So, for example, let's say your sukkah is 20 handbreadths tall. So you got 10 handbreadths of wall, then you got empty 10 handbreadths, but you make a little tiny, you make something on the bottom that, that's not 10 handbreadths, and but it blocks the goats. So would you
do.
what?
They jump.
What did you say?
They jump. It's hard to do that. They can jump over.
They jump. Oh, they jump. It doesn't seem like we're concerned about that. Well, as long as it's 3 handbreadths from the ground, I guess because as we said in the previous Gemara, it says bavas roish, like it can just easily get through. If it can easily get through, so the question would be, would that work if you would do that? So what you have is you have a wall that's 10 handbreadths, and you've blocked the goats. So maybe that could work, huh? It is a topic of discussion in the commentaries, but could this work? But anyway, the bottom line is that the simple case over here is that you left it empty. So you have a 10 handbreadth wall, but it's suspended. And the Mishnah tells us that this is not kosher, and it's 3 tfachim. There's an empty space of 3 tfachim from the ground. It is psula. Now comes the next case. This is what Isaac was mentioning. Milmata l'mayla. What about if you build a wall from below to above? You're extending your wall from below to above. How much do you need to extend it to make it a wall? So here it says, if it's 10 handbreadths tall, then kashera, it'll be kosher. And the reason here, we did learn a while back, and maybe we've mentioned it once or twice, a few times over our learning since then, that there's a concept of good asik mechitzasa, that we pull and extend the mechitza above. We can pull it upward. Now, we should be able to pull it downward, but we have a problem with pulling it downward and extending a wall downward because of the problem of the goats. But pulling it upward, we don't have any problem. And therefore, it could be considered a wall with no issues. And therefore, many people, especially here in Florida, they only build half walls for their sukkah. And they have their upper half of the wall is totally empty. And the reason why it's kosher is because of this Mishnah, that milmata l'mayla, as long as it's 10 handbreadths, it's kosher. Now, what about the other half of the wall? Why there's no walls to your sukkah? The answer is no. We consider it a wall. According to halacha l'Moshe Sinai, there's a halacha given to Moshe Sinai that this is considered a mechitza. It's called good asik mechitzasa, that the walls extend above. Now that not only applies if it's at least 10 handbreadths. As long as you make the 10 handbreadths, that's the sheer mechitza. We will extend it upward to the schach. Rabbi Yosi says, Kashem shamamata lamayla asara tvachim, the same way from below to above. The rule is as long as you have 10 handbreadths, kach mamayla lamata, the same thing applies from above to below, asara tvachim. The rule would apply. He doesn't care if it's not touching the ground or if it's more than 3 handbreadths from the ground. It's a suspended wall. Mechitza teluya, it's called. This is a term we're going to use. Mechitza teluya, a hanging wall, and this is going to be kosher according to Rabbi Yosi. And Rabbi Yosi says that we will extend your wall. We will consider it extended and kosher, and it's considered a kosher wall, no problem. So this is the Mishnah with regard to having partial walls and what is considered a wall, what makes it, how much does it need to be a kosher wall, and we have an argument here. The Tanakama, the first opinion of the Mishnah, and Rabbi Yosi, basically it has to do with the case that they argue about is the case where you're starting from the top and going down, finishing your wall before the floor. It's more than 3 handbreadths before the floor, then that's a problem. The Gemara now asks, it's a common question the Gemara asks, but my komiflagi, what are they really arguing? So we know what the halacha is that they argue about. But what's the source of this problem, of their argument? Where does it start from? What does it stem from? So the Gemara says, "My commitment. What are they really arguing about? What is the halachic term that they would be debating on?" So Mar Savar Mechitza Tluya Materes. So Master holds that a mechitza, a wall that is suspended, that it's tluya, it's hanging, that is matir, that permits a sukkah, that is considered a significant wall. And we basically follow a rule, just like we mentioned, a rule called good asik. We extend the wall upward. So the same thing is we could extend the wall downward, called good achis, that we extend the wall below. We lower the wall. And so it starts there. It's a full 10 handbreadth wall. It's the only thing is it's suspended in midair, suspended from the schach, and we'll extend it downward. That's Rabbi Yosi. And so a mechitza, a teluya is matir, is permissible. It permits the sukkah. And we follow that law of good achis, and it's all based on the fact that it's a mechitza teluya is good. Umar Savar, master, meaning the first opinion of the Mishnah, is generally called the rabbi's opinion. That opinion is mechitza teluya eina materes, that a suspended wall is not acceptable, and we won't say this rule of good achis and extend the wall downward. Now, one of the commentaries wants to say that, so do the rabbis hold good achis or they don't hold good achis? Again, it seems like there's 2 points here. One is there's a law about mechitza, that's a wall that's suspended, and another law of extending the wall. So when you learn it, the Gemara only uses the term mechitza tluya, this suspended wall. Is that considered a wall or not? But what it sounds like then is that why wouldn't it be a wall? What would the problem be with a suspended wall? So it would sound like, well, I guess they don't hold of good achas. They don't hold that you extend the wall downward. You only extend walls upward, right? That would be a reason. That would be the understanding of the rabbis. Mechitza tluya, hanging mechitza is not materes. Why? Because we don't hold of this law of good achas. We only extend the wall upward. In other words, it's an argument to how far the law halacha l'Moshe Sinai goes. There's a halacha, there's a law that Moses gave us at Sinai that regarding sukkah and mechitzas, regarding walls, that walls can be extended upward as long as the wall starts out. As long as walls start out as 10 handbreadths, they can be extended upward. Rabbi Yossi says Hashem told Moshe another law that as long as it's 10 handbreadths, it can be extended downward. The rabbis may be arguing. That's one way of understanding this. But the Aruch LaNer wants to say, and based on what I just mentioned to you a little earlier, a few minutes ago, that it's not that the rabbis don't hold of good achas. The rabbis hold that you could extend the wall downward just like you could extend it upward. The only problem is that you have to get around the problem of the goats. If you could get around the problem of the goats, then you would say good achas. That's the way the Aruch LaNer wants to. Based on that, the scenario I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, he says, well, that would be a scenario where the rabbis agree that you could extend the wall downward or up, but you're going to have a problem with the goats. So that's why a mechitza tluya is not materes, not because we don't hold of the law that it goes downward. We hold of the law it goes downward, just like it goes upward, it could go downward. But because of the goats, we hold that mechitza tluya is not materes, not a real wall.
Rabbi, I'm looking for this phrase good achas. Where is that?
This is not. It's not mentioned here. It's
no wonder I couldn't find it.
I'm just telling you based on the commentaries and so on. But
so what's the translation of good achas?
Well, just like good asik, it's three words. The common term that everyone agrees with is good asik mechitzasa. Asik is from the word like nistalik. It goes up. Right? Siluk. Good asik. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's anyway, good asik mechitzasa means we extend the wall upward. In good achis mechitzasa means extend the wall downward. So asik and achis are two opposites. Asik means to pull up, and achis means to like nachas, rests, it goes down. So lowered, it gets lowered. So those are the two terms. All right, yes, Jeffrey.
But longer ago, when we didn't talk about goats yet, we also had a condition of walls that they were supposed to keep out the weather, and the water shouldn't come in. If you had a wall that was moving like a curtain, and it blew away, and the water could come in. So it seems to me that was even discussed earlier than the animals.
Yeah, when we talked about the sukkah, it says with a vav, with the two vavs, sukkos, and right, we had how many walls and so on. Yeah.
So maybe that also comes into the discussion.
Interesting. Right.
So you talked about weaving down, misal as weaving down.
Well, that's the way Rashi learns it. He says the hischel. If you look in the second Rashi, the hischel la roig hamachitza etzel hasta.
It says
you started weaving it from near the schach, and you're oireg uva kalape mata, and you're slowly going downward towards the bottom. You're continuing. I guess I guess that was the common way to do it. Like why weave it in your house? Weave it while it's hanging and you're standing. I guess maybe.
Well, also seems he doesn't want to use something that's already like a curtain or something like that. He wants you to make it.
Yeah, the question is why, right? Why, maybe it's just the practical way they did things. Like they would build it to shape. They didn't like make. They didn't have a whole conveyor belt of
Prefab, yeah.
prefab, a whole industrial style stuff where everything was already made. So everything was made to its need, according to its need, according to its customized to where it was useful. Okay, did someone want to say anything else? Any questions?
Rabbi, in the case of good artists, when the wall's descending downwards, you're saying that it's got to be attached to the stock in some way. It's got to be weaved into the stock in order for it to hang downwards.
No.
Or how is it? How I don't understand.
No, very simple. You have a frame, and now you want to make walls. So nowadays you just go to Home Depot. In the olden days, they didn't have Home Depots. So what did they do? The wife knew how to weave, so she would weave the wall. You don't buy they didn't have the canvas that you buy now that it fits exactly according to your sukkah. So they would the wife would weave it. So how did she weave it? She would attach a string for the top of your frame, and she would start weaving downwards. The question she would ask her husband is, do I have to keep going? Is this enough? So this is what so they ran to the rabbi. How far do I have to go down? So the rabbi says, you got to go. I hold like the first opinion in the Mishnah. You got to go all the way up to 3 handbreadths from the ground. And Rabbi Yossi
all the way down.
Say no, you don't have to go all the way down. Rabbi Yossi would say, as long as it's 10 handbreadths, you could stop and go back and cook the food now.
3 tvachim. I mean 3 handbreadths. If it's 3 amas from the bottom.
Either the first opinion is 3 up to less than 3 handbreadths from the floor, or Rabbi Yossi.
Tvachis, I'm sorry.
Tfachim, or Rabbi Yossi, which is as long as the curtain is 10 handbreadths, it doesn't have to go to the floor. Rabbi Yossi's view. So either one, however the rabbi is going to paskin, again, she runs to the rabbi or sends her husband to the rabbi, and the rabbi either paskins like Rabbi Yossi or he paskins like the Chachamim.
So if you have a fabric 10 tvachim high, you can put it over your head and let the sukkah go up to 10 tvachim from there.
According to Rabbi Yossi, as long as it's 10 handbreadths, that's good. It doesn't matter if it's on the top part of the sukkah or it's on the bottom part of the sukkah.
Or how much that 10 tvachim constitutes of the wall. As long as you have a patch 10 tvachim tall, it can be anywhere from there up till 20 amas.
Right. It does. You can have empty space, or either upward or downward, according to Rabbi Yossi, up to 20 amas. Okay, we're gonna stop here. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a
Thank you,
wonderful day.
Rebbe.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.